The millionaire caught me playing with his two little girls in the garden. It was the first and last moment he ever truly saw me, and it shattered everything. Our distance, my silence, the walls between us. Maybe you're taking care of children whose parents never notice your efforts or cleaning up while the house is quiet. Tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? I promise, today's story will touch your heart. I can still hear their laughter echoing through that polished living room on Michigan Avenue, the sweet ringing sound that felt like oxygen when I was near them. The smell of warm milk and fresh cookies drifting from the kitchen blended with the softness of the sun-warmed grass beneath my worn hands as I folded tiny dresses in my lap. Those hands, roughened by years of washing, folding, and wiping tears, trembled sometimes with exhaustion, but they held a silent tenderness no one acknowledged. I was the warmth in their world, yet frozen out by the cold, distant stares of the adults who paid me but never thanked me. My name is Margaret, though most people just called me the nanny. I came to that penthouse apartment in downtown Chicago 6 years ago, fresh from a small town in Wisconsin with nothing but my dreams and a suitcase held together with tape. The millionaire, Mr. Richard Sheldon, hired me mostly out of convenience. His wife's demands fluctuated like the stock market he was always watching, but he needed someone reliable to watch over their 2 daughters while he worked late nights, managing his vast fortune by investing in stocks on the stock market. From sleepless nights whispering lullabies to walking the girls to school before dawn, I loved them fiercely. Every scraped knee, every whispered secret in the dark, I was there. I remember the first steps of Emily and Claire, those miraculous moments I wasn't allowed to claim, but I celebrated quietly in the shadows. While Mr. Sheldon burrowed himself in board meetings discussing Bitcoin investments and cryptocurrency portfolios, and his wife chose social galas over bedtime stories, I was the silent guardian of their joy. But that love was a secret, one I kept buried deeply beneath pleasantries and a professional veneer because I was told time and again, remember, you're not family. The Sheldon wealth seemed endless. Their penthouse overlooked Lake Michigan with floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the sunrise every morning. There was so much money involved that part of it was even held in Bitcoin, investments I heard Mr. Sheldon discussing on phone calls that stretched late into the night. His business empire generated millions in dividends, and their net worth grew faster than I could comprehend. Yet for all their assets and capital, they couldn't buy what I gave their daughters every single day: unconditional love. Emily was 5 when I arrived, all curly blonde hair and gap-toothed grins. Claire was barely 3, still learning to tie her shoes and say my name properly. She called me Maggie in her sweet baby voice, and it melted my heart every time. I taught them to ride bicycles in Lincoln Park, helped them build sandcastles at Oak Street Beach, and held them close during thunderstorms when their parents were away on business trips. The routine never changed. I woke at 5:30 every morning in my small room behind the kitchen. Not quite servants' quarters, but certainly separate from the family's living spaces. By 6, I had coffee brewing and breakfast prepared. The smell of pancakes and bacon would fill the kitchen as I laid out Emily's school uniform and Claire's play clothes. Their wealth in dollars seemed endless, but I was paid modestly, enough to send money back to my elderly mother in Wisconsin, but not enough to feel secure about my own future. "Good morning, my angels," I would whisper as I gently woke them up. Emily always groaned about getting up early, but Claire would leap into my arms immediately, her small body warm with sleep. These were the moments that sustained me, the pure, innocent love of children who didn't yet understand the invisible barriers their parents had constructed around our relationship. I packed their lunches with little notes tucked inside. "Have a wonderful day," or "Remember, Maggie loves you." Small gestures that made their faces light up. Mrs. Sheldon never noticed these details. She was usually rushing out to her Pilates class or charity committee meetings, her designer heels clicking across the marble floors as she shouted instructions about pickup times and dinner preferences. The walk to their private school became my favorite part of each day. Emily would tell me about her dreams from the night before, while Claire skipped alongside us, making up songs about the pigeons we saw in Grant Park. Other nannies gathered at the school gates, mostly women like me, middle-aged, caring for children who weren't their own. We formed a quiet sisterhood, sharing knowing glances and small kindnesses, understanding each other's invisible struggles without words. But even among them, I felt different. Some had their own families to return to each evening. I had only the Sheldons, and they had made it clear that my place in their world was conditional, temporary, easily replaced if I ever forgot my position. "You're not family," Mrs. Sheldon snapped one evening when I lingered too long at the dinner table, trying to get a word with the girls about their day at school. Her voice cut through the dining room like ice. "Don't get too involved." Those words cut deeper than any cold shoulder I'd received at family parties where I stood behind linen curtains, invisible. I was trusted with their children's bodies and souls, but not with their conversations or their celebrations. I was good enough to change diapers and kiss scraped knees, but not good enough to sit at their table or be included in family photographs. Holidays were the harshest reminders of my place. Christmas mornings, I would arrive early to help the girls open their presents, watching their joy from the sidelines while I cleaned up discarded wrapping paper. I wrapped most of their gifts myself, trips to FAO Schwartz on State Street, carefully selecting toys that would make them smile, using my own modest salary when their parents were too busy to shop. Yet on Christmas morning, I was invisible, a ghost, moving through their celebration. Thanksgiving was worse. The Sheldons hosted elaborate dinner parties in their penthouse, the dining room filled with other wealthy families from Lincoln Park and Gold Coast neighborhoods. I would spend days preparing, polishing silver, arranging flowers, ensuring every detail was perfect. During the meal, I would serve courses and clear plates, while conversations about stock portfolios and real estate investments flowed around me as if I weren't there. "Margaret, we'll need you to stay late tonight to clean up," Mrs. Sheldon would say without looking at me, her attention focused on her guests' discussions about their latest business ventures and profit margins. I would nod silently and retreat to the kitchen, listening to laughter and clinking glasses from behind the swinging doors. My own Thanksgivings were spent alone in my small room, eating leftovers and calling my mother from the hallway phone so as not to disturb the family's continued celebrations. Mother would ask about my life, and I would lie, telling her how grateful I was, how well I was treated, how much the children loved me. The truth felt too painful to speak aloud, that I had become a professional ghost, essential but erased. Birthdays were perhaps the cruelest reminders. Emily's 6th birthday party was held in their private rooftop garden, with clowns and ponies and a cake that cost more than my monthly salary. I had planned every detail, from the decorations to the games, but when the photographer arrived to capture memories, I was asked to step aside. "We want just family in the photos," Mrs. Sheldon explained, not meeting my eyes. I watched from behind the garden's glass doors as they posed with Emily, their smiles bright and perfect for the camera. Emily kept looking around, searching for me, her little face confused by my absence. But I stayed hidden, swallowing the bitter taste of exclusion. That night, after the guests had left and the family had gone to bed, I cleaned up the party remnants alone. Paper plates and deflated balloons scattered across the marble floors like the fragments of my broken heart. I found Emily's birthday crown under a chair and held it in my hands, remembering how her face had lit up when I'd placed it on her head that morning. "Maggie, am I a real princess now?" she had asked, her eyes sparkling with 6-year-old wonder. "You've always been a real princess to me," I had whispered back. And she had hugged me so tight I thought my heart might burst. But princesses lived in castles with their real families. I was just the help. My silence wasn't weakness. It was my armor. I swallowed tears daily, filling the void with whispered prayers and quiet lullabies, hoping no one noticed the growing emptiness in my chest. Some nights, after I'd tucked the girls into bed and finished my evening chores, I would stand at my small window looking out at the Chicago skyline and wonder if anyone in those glittering buildings knew my name. The loneliness was suffocating. I had given up dating years ago. How could I explain to potential partners that my life belonged to someone else's children? My own dreams of marriage and motherhood had been pushed aside, sacrificed on the altar of loving Emily and Claire. I told myself it was enough, that their love could fill the void in my heart. But late at night, when the penthouse was quiet and dark, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. I had been caring for other people's children for 15 years, first as a babysitter in Wisconsin, then as a nanny for wealthy families in Chicago. I had watched dozens of children grow up, had loved them, had been forgotten by most of them as soon as they no longer needed me. Each goodbye felt like a small death. Each replacement stung like betrayal. But Emily and Claire were different, or maybe I was different with them. Maybe I had finally admitted to myself that I wasn't just their caregiver. I was their mother in every way that mattered, except biology and recognition. The realization terrified me. How do you protect your heart from breaking when you love someone else's children as your own? How do you maintain professional distance when a 3-year-old crawls into your lap during a thunderstorm, or when a 5-year-old saves you a cookie from her lunchbox because Maggie loves chocolate chip cookies best? The truth was, I couldn't maintain that distance anymore. These weren't just the children I cared for. They were my children too, in all the ways that love creates family. And that truth was dangerous in a world where I was replaceable, disposable, easily dismissed if I ever forgot my place. Do you know what it feels like to love someone who will never be allowed to love you back fully? To pour your heart into caring for children who might grow up and forget your name? Then came the day that changed everything. Emily caught the flu badly in the middle of January, during one of Chicago's brutal cold snaps when the wind off Lake Michigan could freeze tears before they hit the ground. It started as a simple cough, but by evening her small body was burning with fever, her breathing shallow and labored. Mrs. Sheldon had left that morning for a spa weekend in Arizona with her charity committee friends, and Mr. Sheldon was in New York for business meetings about a major cryptocurrency investment deal. I was alone with both girls, and Emily was sicker than I'd ever seen her. "Maggie, my throat hurts," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her usually bright eyes were glassy with fever, and her skin felt like fire under my palm. Claire watched from the doorway, her own eyes wide with worry for her big sister. I called their pediatrician, but it was Friday night and he was at a medical conference. The answering service suggested the emergency room if I was concerned, but something in Emily's breathing told me not to wait. I bundled both girls in warm coats and called a taxi, my hands shaking as I gathered medicine and blankets. The emergency room at Northwestern Memorial was crowded and cold, fluorescent lights harsh against the worry etched on parents' faces. I held Emily in my arms while Claire curled against my side, and we waited for what felt like hours. Other parents filled out insurance forms and answered medical history questions, but I realized I didn't have the authority to make medical decisions. I wasn't Emily's mother, just her nanny. "I need to reach her parents," I told the admitting nurse, my voice tight with panic. "Are you family?" she asked, her pen poised over the clipboard. I'm her nanny," I stammered. The words feeling inadequate for the love I felt, the responsibility I carried, the fear that was eating me alive. The nurse's expression softened slightly, but she shook her head. "I'm sorry, but we need parental consent for treatment." I tried calling Mr. Sheldon's cell phone repeatedly, but it went straight to voicemail. His hotel in Manhattan didn't put me through to his room. I wasn't on the approved contact list. Mrs. Sheldon's phone was turned off somewhere in the desert while her daughter fought to breathe in a Chicago hospital. Finally, mercifully, Mr. Sheldon called me back near midnight. Emily's fever had reached 104 degrees, and the doctors were preparing to admit her for IV fluids and monitoring. "Do whatever they need to do," his voice crackled through the phone connection. "I'm catching the first flight home in the morning." But I was the one who stayed the night, sleeping in an uncomfortable chair beside Emily's hospital bed, monitoring her breathing, cooling her fever with damp cloths, singing the lullabies she loved when she was too sick to sleep. Claire had curled up on my lap, exhausted from worry, her small body trusting me to keep her sister safe. Through that long night, I realized something that both exhilarated and terrified me. I would have died for these children, not because it was my job, but because they were mine in every way that mattered. Biology hadn't made me their mother. Love had. Emily's fever finally broke around dawn. She opened her eyes and saw me sitting beside her bed, still holding her hand, still watching over her. "Maggie," she whispered, her voice hoarse but stronger. "You stayed." "Of course I stayed, sweetheart," I murmured, brushing her hair back from her forehead. "I'll always stay." Mr. Sheldon arrived at the hospital around 8 that morning, his usually perfect appearance rumpled from the overnight flight. He found us in Emily's room, me still in yesterday's clothes, Claire asleep across my lap, Emily holding my hand as she slowly ate ice chips from a cup. "You saved her," he said quietly, and for the first time in 6 years, he really looked at me. Not as the help, not as a convenient service provider, but as a woman who had loved his daughter through a crisis when he couldn't be there. I saw something in his eyes that morning. Gratitude, yes, but also a recognition that shook something loose in both of us. He saw me not as someone he employed, but as someone his daughters needed. Someone who had stayed when staying mattered most. "Thank you," he said simply, and those 2 words carried more weight than any paycheck ever had. But recognition like that is dangerous when you're supposed to remain invisible. It meant that our carefully maintained boundaries were beginning to crack. It meant that the professional distance I'd been taught to maintain was crumbling under the weight of real love, real commitment, real belonging. And that terrified me more than Emily's fever ever could. The weeks following Emily's illness brought subtle changes to our household routine. Mr. Sheldon began acknowledging me in ways he never had before, asking about my night when he came home late, inquiring about my own health when I coughed, even bringing me coffee some mornings when he was up early for West Coast business calls. Mrs. Sheldon noticed these changes too, and I could see the disapproval tightening around her eyes. She began giving me more specific instructions about maintaining proper boundaries with the children, reminding me frequently that I was staff, not family. "I don't want the girls getting too attached," she told me one afternoon while I was folding laundry in the utility room. "It's not healthy for them to see you as more than you are." But it was too late for that warning. The attachment had grown over 6 years of scraped knees and bedtime stories, of first days of school and nighttime fears, of all the small daily intimacies that create real bonds between people. You can't tell a heart when to stop loving, especially not a child's heart. Emily had started drawing pictures of our family, stick figures holding hands under a sun, with Mama Maggie written in her careful first-grade handwriting beside her parents and sister. When Mrs. Sheldon found these drawings tucked into Emily's backpack, she threw them away without saying a word. But I had already seen them, had already felt my heart break and soar at the same time. Claire, now 4 years old, had begun introducing me to her friends as my other mommy. The other nannies at the park would smile knowingly, but I could see the question in their eyes. How long before this ended badly? How long before loving too much cost me everything? The answer came sooner than I expected. One winter evening, after the children had been tucked into bed, I was cleaning up the playroom when I heard Claire crying from her bedroom. She'd had a nightmare about monsters under her bed, and when I went to comfort her, she climbed into my lap and wrapped her small arms around my neck. "Maggie," she whispered against my shoulder, "are you my real mommy too?" The question hung in the air like a prayer and a confession. How do you explain to a 4-year-old that love doesn't always create the family structures society recognizes? How do you tell a child that you love her like your own daughter, but will never be allowed to claim her? "I love you like you're my own little girl," I whispered back, my throat tight with emotion. "I love you so much, it hurts sometimes." "Then you are my real mommy," she said with the simple logic of childhood. "My heart, mommy." My heart, mommy. Those words unlocked something in me that I'd been trying to keep safely buried for 6 years. They acknowledged the truth I'd been afraid to admit even to myself, that I had become a mother through love rather than birth, through daily care rather than biology, through the 1,000 small sacrifices that nobody saw, but that had shaped these children's lives. But that truth was also my greatest vulnerability. I started confiding in Emily during our quiet moments together, not the heavy adult truths that would burden her small shoulders, but gentler acknowledgments of our connection. When she asked why I never talked about my own family, I told her about the baby I'd lost years before she was born, the pregnancy that ended in heartbreak when I was 28 and still believed I had time for everything. "I dreamed I'd have children like you and Claire," I told her one afternoon as we sat in Lincoln Park, watching the ducks on the pond. "I dreamed I'd be someone's mommy." "But you are someone's mommy," Emily said, leaning against my arm with the certainty that only children possess. "You're our Maggie mommy. That's different than a regular mommy, but it's still real." Out of the mouths of babes. This 6-year-old had identified something that the adults in her world refused to acknowledge. That family isn't just biology, that motherhood isn't just birth, that love creates its own relationships that are just as valid and important as the ones society recognizes. But the adult world wasn't ready for Emily's wisdom. The crisis that shattered our fragile peace came from an unexpected source: jealousy disguised as concern. Mrs. Martinez, the weekend housekeeper who cleaned the penthouse when I had my days off, had watched our growing closeness with increasing resentment. She'd worked for wealthy families longer than I had, but none of her employer's children had ever drawn pictures of her or called her Heart Mommy. Her resentment crystallized into malice one Saturday when she noticed me helping Emily and Claire make friendship bracelets at the kitchen table. We were laughing together, heads bent over colorful threads, when Mrs. Martinez walked through to empty the trash. The look on her face was pure sourness. "You think you're better than the rest of us," she muttered as she passed behind my chair. "Think you're special, because those kids like you." I ignored the comment, but I should have recognized the warning signs. Jealousy in domestic workers can be dangerous when it's directed at someone who has what they want: recognition, love, a sense of belonging. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Sheldon's diamond tennis bracelet went missing from her jewelry box. It was worth $20,000, a gift from her husband for their 10th anniversary. The house was turned upside down searching for it, but it was nowhere to be found. Mrs. Martinez was the one who suggested that someone with access to the master bedroom might have taken it. She didn't say my name directly, but her implications were clear. I was the only employee who went into their bedroom regularly, tidying up while they were at work, changing sheets, organizing Mrs. Sheldon's closet. "I hate to say this," Mrs. Martinez told Mrs. Sheldon with false reluctance, "but Margaret has been acting differently lately, getting too comfortable, like she thinks she belongs here." The accusation hit like a physical blow. 6 years of loyal service, of loving their children, of sacrificing my own dreams for their family's needs, all of it dismissed because a jealous woman needed someone to blame. Mrs. Sheldon called me into the living room that evening after the girls were in bed. Mr. Sheldon sat in his leather chair, his expression unreadable behind his reading glasses. The room felt cold despite the fireplace crackling in the corner. "Margaret, we need to discuss the missing bracelet," Mrs. Sheldon began, her voice formal and distant. I don't know anything about any bracelet, I said immediately, my heart pounding. I would never take anything that didn't belong to me. Mrs. Martinez seems to think you might have seen something, or that maybe you accidentally moved it while cleaning, Mr. Sheldon said carefully. But I could hear the doubt creeping into his voice. Accidentally moved it. That's how they chose to phrase their suspicion, as if I might have somehow accidentally stolen a $20,000 piece of jewelry. I've never seen any tennis bracelet, I insisted, my voice growing stronger despite my fear. I clean Mrs. Sheldon's jewelry box every week, and I would have noticed something like that. The conversation continued for 20 more excruciating minutes, with them asking me to think carefully about whether I might have misplaced or borrowed the bracelet. Each euphemism felt like another knife twist, another denial of the integrity I demonstrated for 6 years. By the end of that conversation, I realized with growing horror that they had already decided I was guilty. The questioning was just a formality, a way to make themselves feel better about what they were planning to do. "We think it would be best if you took some time off while we sort this out," Mrs. Sheldon said finally, "just until we can figure out what happened." Time off. Another euphemism. What she meant was, pack your bags and leave, and don't expect to come back. I wanted to fight. I wanted to demand they search my room, call references from my previous employers, do anything that would prove my innocence. But I could see in their faces that my word wasn't enough, that 6 years of loyalty and love meant nothing against the seed of suspicion that had been planted in their minds. "I'll pack my things," I said quietly, my dignity the only thing I had left to hold on to. "We'll provide a reference for future employment," Mr. Sheldon offered, as if that could somehow make up for the destruction of my character, my home, my family. I walked upstairs to my small room behind the kitchen and began folding my clothes into the same suitcase I'd arrived with 6 years earlier. My hands shook as I packed the few personal items I'd accumulated: photos of Emily and Claire, drawings they'd made me, a coffee mug with "World's Best Nanny" that Emily had given me for my birthday. The hardest part was packing the children's gifts to me: a handmade bookmark from Emily's art class, a painted rock from Claire that was supposed to look like a butterfly, a wilted flower crown from a tea party we'd had in the garden. These treasures meant more to me than any salary ever could, but they were also evidence of the love that was now being taken away from me. I was finishing packing when I heard small footsteps in the hallway. Claire appeared in my doorway, her hair messy from sleep, her favorite stuffed elephant tucked under her arm. "Maggie, why are you putting your clothes in the suitcase?" she asked, her 4-year-old voice heavy with confusion. Before I could answer, Emily appeared behind her sister, instantly understanding what the suitcase meant in a way that Claire couldn't yet comprehend. "Are you leaving us?" Emily whispered, her voice breaking on the last word. I knelt down to their level, pulling them both into my arms, trying to find words that would explain the unexplainable. How do you tell children you love that their parents have decided you're a criminal? How do you say goodbye to the most important relationships of your life over a lie? "I have to go away for a while," I managed to say, my voice thick with tears I was trying to hold back for their sake. "But why?" Claire demanded, her small hands gripping my shirt. "Did we do something bad?" "No, my sweet girls, you didn't do anything wrong. You're perfect, both of you." I kissed the tops of their heads, breathing in their familiar scents, Johnson's baby shampoo and the lingering sweetness of bedtime snacks. Sometimes grown-ups have problems that don't make sense, and I have to go away until they get fixed. "But I don't want you to go," Emily said, her arms tightening around my neck. "You're my Maggie. I need you." Those words nearly broke me completely. She needed me, and I needed her, but need wasn't enough against suspicion and jealousy and the invisible barriers that had always existed between us. "I need you too," I whispered back. "I'll always need you, both of you, and I'll carry you right here in my heart wherever I go." I placed their small hands over my heart so they could feel it beating. "Can you feel how much I love you?" They nodded solemnly, their own tears beginning to fall. Mrs. Sheldon's voice called from downstairs, "Girls, back to bed right now." We all froze, knowing that our goodbye was being cut short, that there wouldn't be time for all the things I wanted to tell them, all the love I wanted to make sure they remembered. "I have to go to your parents now," I said quietly. "But I want you to remember something very important. I love you more than all the stars in the sky, more than all the sand on the beach, more than all the love in the whole world. Can you remember that for me? More than all the love in the whole world," Emily repeated solemnly. "More than all the stars," Claire added, though she didn't fully understand what was happening. "That's right. And whenever you miss me, you look up at the stars and remember that I'm somewhere looking at the same stars and thinking about you." Mrs. Sheldon appeared in the doorway then, her face set in stern lines. "Girls, I told you to go back to bed. Margaret, we need you to finish up here." I kissed each of their foreheads one last time, memorizing the feel of their soft skin, the weight of their small bodies against mine. Then I stood up and gently guided them toward their mother, my heart breaking with every step. "Go with Mommy now," I told them, though the word Mommy felt strange in my mouth. This woman who was sending me away had given birth to them, but I was the one who had been their mother in all the daily ways that mattered. I watched them walk down the hallway, Emily looking back over her shoulder with tears streaming down her face, Claire clutching her stuffed elephant and asking her mother questions I couldn't hear the answers to. An hour later, I stood at the penthouse's front door with my suitcase and a taxi waiting downstairs. Mr. Sheldon handed me an envelope with my final paycheck and a reference letter, payment for 6 years of love and loyalty, as if what I'd given their family could be calculated in dollars and cents. "I'm sorry it ended this way," he said, but his words felt hollow, rehearsed. I looked past him into the home that had been mine for 6 years. At the hallway where I'd chased the girls during games of hide and seek, at the kitchen where I'd packed thousands of lunches and kissed thousands of scraped knees. Everything looked the same, but it would never be home again. "I didn't take the bracelet," I said one last time, meeting his eyes directly. "I would never steal from this family. I loved—" My voice caught on the past tense. "I love this family." He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I hope you understand, we had to—" "No," I said quietly. "You didn't have to. You chose to." And then I walked out of their lives, out of Emily and Claire's lives, carrying my heart in pieces and my head held high. The taxi driver helped me load my suitcase into his trunk, and as we pulled away from the building, I pressed my face to the window for one last look at the penthouse. I thought I saw a small face at Emily's bedroom window, but we were too far away for me to be sure. I had nowhere to go. I'd lived in that penthouse for 6 years. It had been my home, my world, my entire life. I'd saved some money, but not enough for a security deposit on an apartment. I'd put everything I had into loving their children, and now I was homeless and heartbroken and accused of theft. The taxi driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Where to, ma'am?" I gave him the address of a cheap motel near O'Hare Airport, one of those places where people stayed when they were between lives, between hopes, between one version of themselves and whatever came next. That night, lying on a scratchy bedspread in a room that smelled of industrial disinfectant and other people's sadness, I finally allowed myself to cry. I cried for Emily and Claire, who would wake up tomorrow and find me gone. I cried for the injustice of being accused of stealing from people I'd served faithfully, but mostly I cried for the family I'd lost, not through death or divorce or any of the normal ways families break apart, but through suspicion and class differences and the invisible walls that separate the hired help from the people they learn to love. Have you ever lost a family that was never legally yours to begin with? Have you ever had your character assassinated by people who claimed to trust you? Those first days without Emily and Claire were the darkest of my life. I moved from the motel to a small studio apartment in a neighborhood I could afford, far from the gleaming towers of Michigan Avenue where I'd spent 6 years of my life. My new home had thin walls and a radiator that clanged all night, but it was mine, paid for with my own money, free from the conditional acceptance I'd lived under for so long. I applied for other nanny positions, but the reference from the Sheldons was carefully worded to raise questions without making direct accusations. Margaret completed her employment with us satisfactorily, though our arrangement ended due to concerns about boundaries and missing personal items. Anyone reading between those lines would think twice before hiring me. I took a job instead at a daycare center on the South Side, working with multiple children instead of being devoted to just 2. The pay was less than half what the Sheldons had paid me, and I missed the intimacy of being part of a family, but it was honest work with people who valued my experience. Still, everywhere I went, I saw Emily and Claire. A little girl with curly blonde hair at the grocery store would make my heart skip. The sound of children's laughter in the park would make me turn around, expecting to see familiar faces. I kept their drawings in my wallet and looked at them when the missing them threatened to crush my chest. 3 months after I left the Sheldon penthouse, I was working late at the daycare center, preparing art supplies for the next day's activities, when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something told me to answer it. Margaret? The voice was small and distant, barely above a whisper. Emily? My heart stopped. Honey, is that you? Maggie, I found Mommy's phone. She was crying, her words coming in little gasps. I missed you so much. Where did you go? Why didn't you come back? Oh, sweetheart, I whispered, tears already streaming down my face. I missed you too. I miss you every single day. Claire cries at bedtime sometimes. She asks for you, but Mommy says you can't come back. Did we do something wrong? Are you mad at us? No, my angel, no. I was sobbing now, not caring if anyone at the daycare center could hear me. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm not mad at you. I love you so much, Emily. I love you and Claire more than all the stars in the sky, remember? More than all the love in the whole world, she whispered back, and I could hear that she was crying too. That's right. More than all the love in the whole world. I found Mommy's bracelet, Emily said suddenly, her voice very quiet. It was in Daddy's car, under the seat. Mrs. Martinez was lying about you, wasn't she? My breath caught in my throat. The bracelet. The reason for my exile, for their broken hearts, for 3 months of separation and sorrow. Where is the bracelet now, sweetheart? I gave it to Mommy. She got really quiet and then she went to talk to Daddy in their room for a long time. They were talking loud, but I couldn't hear the words. So they knew. They knew I had been innocent all along, that I had been wrongly accused, wrongly dismissed, wrongly separated from the children I loved. And they hadn't called me, hadn't apologized, hadn't tried to make it right. Emily, honey, I need you to hang up the phone now before your parents realize you're using it. But I want to talk to you more. I have so much to tell you. I know, sweetheart, I know, but you need to hang up now so you don't get in trouble. My heart was breaking all over again, having to end this connection I'd dreamed of for months. But Emily, I want you to remember something very important. I think about you and Claire every single day. I carry you both right here in my heart, and nothing will ever change that. Will you come back now, since they found the bracelet? The question I'd been hoping for and dreading at the same time. Would they ask me back? Would they acknowledge their mistake? Would they try to repair the damage they'd done to all of us? I don't know, sweetheart, but I want you to know that whether I come back or not, I will always, always love you. Can you tell Claire that for me? I will. I love you too, Maggie, more than all the stars. More than all the stars, I repeated, and then the line went dead. I sat in that empty daycare center and cried until there were no tears left. They knew I was innocent. They had known for weeks, maybe months, that they had destroyed our family over a lie, over a bracelet that had somehow fallen out of Mrs. Sheldon's purse and been forgotten under a car seat. But instead of calling me, instead of apologizing, instead of trying to repair the damage they had done, they had chosen silence. They had decided that their pride was more important than their children's broken hearts, more important than justice, more important than love. That night changed something fundamental in me. For 6 years, I had accepted their treatment of me because I believed that's what my position required. I had swallowed insults and exclusions and casual cruelties because I thought that was the price of loving Emily and Claire. But this betrayal, not just the original accusation, but their continued silence after learning the truth, showed me that their respect for me had never existed at all. I deserved better. Emily and Claire deserved better. And it was time I stopped accepting less than what we all deserved. The next morning, I called my old friend Rosa, who had worked as a nanny for wealthy families in Boston for 20 years. I told her everything: the accusation, the separation, Emily's phone call, the discovery of the bracelet, the continued silence from her parents. "Mija," Rosa said when I finished my story, "you know what you have to do." "What?" "You have to stop letting them control this story. You have to take your power back." "But what about Emily and Claire? If I make their parents angry?" "Their parents are already keeping you from them," Rosa interrupted. "What more can they do? You're living your life in exile, waiting for them to give you permission to love those babies again. But love doesn't need permission, Margaret. Love just needs courage." Her words hit me like lightning. For 3 months I had been living as if I were still their employee, still bound by their rules, still accepting their right to control my relationship with Emily and Claire. But I wasn't their employee anymore. They had fired me. They had cut me loose from all obligations to respect their authority over my life. I was a free woman who loved 2 little girls, and those girls loved me back. Nothing else should matter. That weekend, I did something I'd never done before in 6 years of working for the Sheldons. I went to Emily and Claire's school. I knew their schedule by heart. Saturday morning ballet class for Emily, playground time for Claire. I sat on a bench across from the dance studio and waited, my heart pounding with nervousness and determination. When Emily's class ended, she came bouncing out in her pink leotard and ballet slippers, her hair pulled back in the bun I'd helped her perfect hundreds of times. She was laughing with another little girl about something their teacher had said, and for a moment she looked so happy that I almost changed my mind. Maybe she was healing from our separation. Maybe seeing me would just reopen wounds that were starting to close. But then she saw me. Her face went through a series of emotions in rapid succession: surprise, disbelief, pure joy, and then something that broke my heart completely. A quick, nervous glance around to see if her parents were watching. I stood up from the bench and walked toward her slowly, not wanting to frighten her or create a scene that might get her in trouble later. "Maggie," she whispered when I was close enough to hear her. "Hello, my angel," I said softly. "I've missed you so much." She launched herself into my arms then, her small body hitting mine with the force of 3 months of missing and longing. I held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling her heart beating against my chest. "I knew you would come back," she whispered against my neck. "I kept looking for you everywhere." "I'm here now," I murmured, though I didn't know how long I would be allowed to stay. "Where's Claire?" "On the playground with Mrs. Anderson." Mrs. Anderson was the weekend nanny they'd hired to replace me, a stern older woman who the girls had told me they didn't like very much. "Maggie, are you coming home now?" Home. The word hung in the air between us, loaded with longing and impossibility. "I don't know yet, sweetheart, but I want you to know that I think about you and your sister every single day. I carry you both right here." I placed her hand over my heart, just like I had the night I left. "Can you feel that?" She nodded solemnly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Emily Rose Sheldon. "What are you doing?" We both turned at the sound of Mrs. Anderson's sharp voice. She was walking toward us across the parking lot, Claire's hand tight in hers, her face set in disapproving lines. "I was just saying hello to Maggie," Emily said, but I could hear the fear creeping into her voice. "Your parents specifically said you were not to have contact with this person," Mrs. Anderson said, her eyes fixed on me with obvious hostility. "Let go of her right now." Claire had recognized me by then and was pulling against Mrs. Anderson's grip, trying to reach me. "Maggie! Maggie, you came back!" "Claire, stop that this instant," Mrs. Anderson snapped. But Claire was 4 years old and determined to get to the person she loved. She broke free and ran to me, wrapping her arms around my legs. "I missed you so much, Maggie," she said, looking up at me with those bright blue eyes I'd seen in my dreams every night for 3 months. "Are you coming home with us?" I knelt down to her level, holding both girls close to me, trying to memorize everything about this moment, their faces, their voices, the weight of their small bodies against mine. "I can't come home today," I said quietly, "but I want you both to remember something very important. I love you more than all the stars in the sky," Emily finished. "More than all the love in the whole world," Claire added. "That's right. And no matter where I am, no matter how long it's been since we've seen each other, that will never change. Come along, girls, right now." Mrs. Anderson had pulled out her phone and was clearly preparing to call the Sheldons. "Your parents are going to hear about this." I kissed each of their foreheads quickly, then stood up and stepped back. "Go with Mrs. Anderson now," I told them gently. "Don't get in trouble because of me." "But we want to stay with you," Emily protested, her voice rising with distress. "I know, sweet girl, but you need to go now. Remember what I told you about the stars, okay? Look for me there." Mrs. Anderson took each girl firmly by the hand and began walking them toward her car, but both of them kept looking back at me, their faces streaked with tears. "We love you, Maggie," Emily called out. "Love you too," Claire echoed. "I love you both," I called back, not caring who heard me, not caring about boundaries or professional distance or anything except making sure they knew that my love for them was bigger than any rule their parents tried to impose. I watched until Mrs. Anderson's car pulled out of the parking lot, then I sat back down on the bench and allowed myself to cry. Seeing them had been worth whatever consequences might follow. They needed to know I hadn't forgotten them, hadn't stopped loving them, hadn't chosen to leave them. They needed to know that some loves are strong enough to survive separation and silence, and even the adults who try to control them. My phone rang an hour later. Mr. Sheldon's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered not answering. But I was tired of running, tired of being treated like a criminal, tired of letting them control the narrative of our story. "Hello." "Richard," I said, using his first name deliberately, establishing that we were now equals rather than employer and employee. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" His voice was loud with anger. "You were explicitly told to stay away from our children." "I was fired from my job," I said calmly. "I was never court-ordered to stay away from Emily and Claire. They're not just your children, Richard. They're also children I helped raise for 6 years, children who love me and whom I love. You have no rights here, Margaret. None. If you contact them again, I'll get a restraining order." "Based on what? The theft I was accused of but didn't commit? The theft you now know I didn't commit because Emily found your wife's bracelet in your car?" Silence on the other end of the line. He hadn't expected me to know about that. "Emily called me," I continued when he didn't respond. "She was crying because she missed me. She told me she found the bracelet that you and your wife know I was innocent all along. But instead of calling to apologize, instead of trying to make this right, you chose to let your children suffer. You chose to let them think I abandoned them." It's complicated, he said finally, his anger deflating into something that sounded almost like shame. No, it's not complicated. It's simple. You were wrong. You accused an innocent person, you destroyed our family over a lie, and now you're too proud to admit it. Our family? His voice sharpened again. You were never part of our family, Margaret. You were an employee. I was Emily's Maggie and Claire's heart mommy, I said, using their words, claiming the titles they had given me. I was the one who held them when they were sick, who kissed their scraped knees, who sang them to sleep every night for 6 years. Biology doesn't make a family, Richard. Love does, and I love those girls like they were my own. Well, they're not your own. They're mine and my wife's, and we decide who has access to them. You can make rules about your house and your money and your business, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word, but you can't make rules about love. You can't control who loves your children or who your children love, and those girls love me whether you like it or not. I hung up before he could respond. That evening, I did something I'd been thinking about for weeks. I started writing, not a journal, not a letter, but a story. The story of a woman who loved 2 little girls so much that she lost herself, and then found herself again. The story of invisible families and hired hearts and the courage it takes to love without permission. I wrote about the loneliness of being essential but excluded, the heartbreak of loving someone else's children as your own, the strength it takes to maintain dignity in the face of injustice. I wrote for all the nannies and housekeepers and caregivers who pour their hearts into other people's families and get forgotten when they're no longer convenient. And as I wrote, something inside me began to heal. The story found its way to a local newspaper reporter who was interested in the hidden lives of domestic workers. She interviewed me, then several other nannies who had similar experiences, women who had been accused of theft, women who had been separated from children they loved, women who had sacrificed their own dreams to nurture other people's families. The article ran on a Sunday with my story as the centerpiece. The headline read, "The Invisible Mothers: How Chicago's Nannies Navigate Love and Loss in Other People's Families." I expected the article to pass unnoticed, just another human interest story in a world full of bigger news. But something about it resonated with people. Letters started arriving at the newspaper office, from other caregivers sharing their stories, from parents who realized they had never properly thanked the women who helped raise their children, from grown children who remembered nannies they had loved and lost touch with. The response was so overwhelming that the newspaper asked me to write a weekly column about the experiences of domestic workers. They offered me a small salary, not much, but enough to supplement my daycare income and give me a platform to tell the stories that had been invisible for too long. For the first time since I'd left the Sheldon penthouse, I felt like I had a purpose beyond just surviving. I was giving voice to experiences that had been silent for too long, shining light on relationships that society preferred to ignore. 3 months after the first article ran, I received an unexpected visitor at the daycare center. I was in the middle of reading story time to a group of 4-year-olds when the director knocked on my classroom door. "Margaret, there's someone here to see you," she said quietly. "Can you take a break?" I left my class with my assistant and walked to the front office, wondering who could be visiting me at work. What I found there nearly knocked me to my knees. Mr. Sheldon standing awkwardly by the reception desk, holding a copy of that weekend's newspaper with my column clearly visible on the front page. "Hello, Margaret," he said quietly. "Richard." I kept my voice neutral, professional. After our last phone conversation, I wasn't sure if he was there to threaten me with legal action or to finally apologize. "What brings you here?" "I read your column," he said, holding up the newspaper. "All of them, actually. I've been reading them since they started." I waited for him to continue, not willing to make this easier for him than it needed to be. "I came to apologize," he said finally, "for the bracelet, for accusing you, for not calling you when we found out we were wrong." for keeping you away from the girls when they need you. The apology I'd been waiting for, the acknowledgement I'd dreamed about. But now that it was happening, I felt strangely calm, almost detached. His words couldn't undo 3 months of separation, couldn't heal the wounds that had been carved into Emily and Claire's hearts, couldn't restore the trust that had been broken. "Why now?" I asked. "It's been 6 months since you fired me, 3 months since Emily found the bracelet. Why are you apologizing now?" He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other just like he had the night I was fired. "The girls, they're not doing well. Claire has nightmares every night. Emily is angry all the time, getting in trouble at school. They ask about you constantly. Mrs. Anderson says they're impossible to manage." So this wasn't really about me at all. This was about his children being difficult, about his convenience being disrupted, about finding a solution to the problem their grief was creating in his ordered life. "I see," I said quietly. "We made a mistake," he continued, apparently interpreting my silence as receptivity to his apology. "We should have trusted you. We should have investigated more thoroughly before making accusations. You should have known me well enough after 6 years not to need an investigation," I corrected. "You should have trusted me because I had earned your trust through my actions, through my love for your children, through my loyalty to your family." He nodded, looking genuinely ashamed. "You're right. We should have known." "But you didn't know me at all, did you? After 6 years of living in your home, of caring for your children, of being part of your daily life, you still saw me as just the help, someone who could be easily dismissed when it was convenient." "That's not—" He started to protest, then stopped. "Maybe you're right. Maybe we didn't see you the way we should have. The way you should have seen me was as a human being who loved your children. The way you should have treated me was with the respect that love deserved." I paused, looking at this man who had once held so much power over my life and now seemed so small, so uncomfortable in his expensive suit and leather shoes. "But respect can't be demanded, Richard. It can only be given freely, and you never chose to give it to me." "I'm giving it to you now," he said quietly. "I'm asking you to come back. The girls need you. We need you." There it was, the offer I had dreamed about for 6 months, the chance to return to Emily and Claire, to resume the relationship that had meant everything to me, to go back to the life I had built in their penthouse. But as I looked at Mr. Sheldon standing in that daycare center, surrounded by the happy chaos of children who weren't his, asking me to return to a life where I would always be conditional, always be disposable, always be just the help, I realized something that surprised me. I didn't want to go back. "I can't," I said simply. His face showed genuine shock. "What do you mean you can't? I thought, the girls miss you so much. Don't you miss them?" "I miss them every single day," I said, and my voice broke slightly on the words. "I love them more than I can express. But I can't go back to being invisible in their lives. I can't go back to loving them in silence, to being excluded from their family, even though I'm essential to their daily life. I can't go back to being someone who can be fired over a misunderstanding and forgotten when it's convenient." "It wouldn't be like that this time," he said quickly. "We've learned. We'd treat you differently." "Would you?" I asked. "Would you include me in family photos? Would you introduce me as someone important to Emily and Claire, not just as the help? Would you respect my opinion about their education, their friendships, their development? Would you value my input as someone who knows them as well as you do?" He hesitated, and in that hesitation, I had my answer. "I thought not," I said gently. "You want me to come back to make your children happy and your household run smoothly, but you don't want to change the fundamental relationship we had, where I was essential but invisible, necessary but not valued. So what do you want?" he asked, and I could hear frustration creeping into his voice. "Money. We could increase your salary. Better benefits?" I want to be able to love Emily and Claire openly, I said. I want to see them regularly without having to sneak around or worry about being accused of overstepping boundaries. I want them to know that I haven't abandoned them, that I think about them every day, that my love for them doesn't depend on whether I work for their parents. That's not really possible, he said slowly. You have to understand our position. We're their parents. We have to control who has influence in their lives. And I have to control who has influence in mine, I replied. I've spent 6 years loving your children more than anything else in the world, and it nearly destroyed me. I lost myself in that love. I sacrificed my own dreams and needs and future for the privilege of caring for Emily and Claire, and when it was convenient for you, you threw me away like garbage. His face flushed with anger or embarrassment. I couldn't tell which. We made a mistake. I'm trying to make it right. You're trying to fix a problem, I corrected. Your children are unhappy, and you think bringing me back will solve that problem, but you're not trying to make it right with me. You haven't asked how I've been these past 6 months. You haven't acknowledged the pain you caused me, the trauma of being falsely accused, the agony of being separated from children I love. You're here because you need something from me, not because you care about me as a person. The words hung in the air between us, and I could see him processing them, trying to find a response that would convince me to return to his employment. The girls talk about you constantly, he said finally, playing what he clearly thought was his strongest card. They cry for you. They ask when you're coming home. Don't you want to end their suffering? It was a low blow, using Emily and Claire's pain to manipulate me into compliance, but it was also revealing. It showed me that even now, even while apologizing, he still saw our relationship in terms of his family's needs rather than my humanity. Their suffering ends when you tell them the truth, I said firmly. When you explain that you made a mistake, that I didn't abandon them, that I love them and always will. When you stop making me the villain in a story where I was the victim. And then what? You just want to visit them sometimes? Like a family friend? The way he said it made it clear how unlikely he thought that was, how little he understood about the relationship I had with his daughters. I want them to know I'm in their lives, I said. I want to be able to send them birthday cards and Christmas presents. I want them to know where I am and how to reach me when they need me. I want them to understand that love doesn't end just because employment does. That's complicated, he said, echoing his words from our phone conversation months earlier. Only because you're making it complicated, I replied. Love isn't complicated. Respect isn't complicated. Acknowledging that I was an important part of your daughter's lives for 6 years isn't complicated. What's complicated is trying to maintain control over relationships that were never yours to control. We stared at each other across the reception area of the daycare center, and I could see him trying to figure out how to convince me to return to the arrangement that had worked so well for his family and so poorly for me. Finally, he tried a different approach. What if we made some changes? What if you had more autonomy, more respect? What if we treated you like part of the family? I was part of the family for 6 years, I said quietly. I was Emily's Maggie and Claire's heart mommy. I was the one who knew their favorite bedtime stories and their biggest fears and their most secret dreams. I was family in every way that mattered, except the ways that you were willing to acknowledge. So you won't come back? Not as your employee, not as someone whose relationship with Emily and Claire depends on your approval, your mood, your convenience. I paused, watching his face carefully. But I would be willing to be their friend, their chosen family, someone who loves them regardless of whether their parents understand or approve of that love. We couldn't agree to that, he said quickly. We have to have control over who influences our children. Then you don't really want to make this right, I said with finality. You want to return to the arrangement where I love your children on your terms, where I'm available when you need me and invisible when you don't, where I can be discarded again the next time someone makes an accusation or you decide I've gotten too close. I could see in his face that I was right, that despite his apology and his acknowledgement of their mistake, he still wanted the same fundamental arrangement: my love and labor available on demand, my humanity optional. "The girls need you," he said one more time, as if repetition would wear down my resistance. The girls need to know that when someone loves them, that love is permanent and unconditional. They need to learn that relationships built on genuine care don't disappear when convenience dictates. They need to see that the woman who helped raise them for 6 years values herself enough to demand proper treatment. I smiled sadly. Those are important lessons for little girls to learn, maybe the most important lessons I can teach them. He left without saying goodbye, and I never saw him again, but that wasn't the end of our story. 2 weeks later, I received a letter at my apartment. The envelope was addressed in the careful handwriting I recognized immediately as Emily's second-grade printing, with Claire's name added in crayon beneath her sister's signature. Inside was a drawing, stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, with "Our Family" written across the top in Emily's neat letters. There were 5 figures, one labeled Mommy, one labeled Daddy, one labeled Emily, one labeled Claire, and one labeled Maggie. Even though I was no longer part of their household, even though their parents refused to acknowledge my place in their lives, Emily had included me in her drawing of their family. I was still there, still connected, still loved. At the bottom of the paper, in Emily's careful printing, was a message. "Daddy told us you can't come home, but you still love us. We love you too. More than all the stars in the sky. We will find you when we're bigger." I held that drawing and cried until there were no tears left. But these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition, of validation, of hope. Emily understood. Somehow, this 7-year-old girl understood that love doesn't require permission, that family isn't defined by law or convenience, that some connections are stronger than the adults who try to control them. She would find me when she was bigger. She would remember the woman who had been her heart mommy for 6 years, and when she did, I would be ready. Over the following months, I built a new life for myself. My column for the newspaper became popular enough that I was offered a book contract, a collection of stories about the invisible workers who keep American families functioning. I called it Heart Mothers and dedicated it to Emily and Claire and all the children who know that love comes in many forms. The book found its audience among women who had worked as caregivers, parents who realized they needed to better appreciate the people who helped raise their children, and grown children who remembered nannies and housekeepers who had shaped their lives but been forgotten by their families. I started speaking at conferences about domestic workers' rights, advocating for better protections and recognition for the millions of women who care for other people's families. I testified before the City Council about paid sick leave for household employees, about the need for clear contracts and respectful treatment. And slowly, carefully, I began to build relationships that weren't defined by servitude or conditional acceptance. I joined a book club at my neighborhood library. I volunteered at a local food bank. I started dating a kind man named James, who worked as a social worker and understood the complexities of caring for people who weren't technically family. For the first time in years, I was living for myself rather than in the shadows of someone else's life. But I never stopped loving Emily and Claire. I never stopped missing them. I never stopped hoping that someday, when they were old enough to make their own choices about relationships, they would remember the woman who had loved them unconditionally for 6 years. That someday came sooner than I expected. I was at home on a Saturday afternoon, working on my second book, when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a teenage girl with familiar curly blonde hair and a younger girl with bright blue eyes I had seen in my dreams for years. Emily was 13 now, tall and serious-looking, in the way that teenage girls often are. Claire was 11, still baby-faced, but with a determined expression that reminded me of her older sister. They were both dressed carefully, as if they had planned this visit and wanted to look their best. I opened the door, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. "Maggie," Emily said, her voice uncertain, "we found your address online. We've been saving money for the bus fare for months." I pulled them both into my arms, not caring if my neighbors saw, not caring if their parents had given permission, not caring about anything except the fact that the children I loved were finally in my arms again. "My angels," I whispered, breathing in their scents, feeling their solid weight against my chest. "I've missed you so much." "We missed you too," Claire said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "We never stopped missing you." I invited them into my small apartment, nervous about how different my home was from the penthouse where they had always seen me. But they looked around with genuine interest, exclaiming over my books and photos, settling onto my secondhand couch as if they belonged there. "We read your book," Emily said, producing a copy of Heart Mothers from her backpack. "Mom and Dad don't know we have it. We ordered it online and had it sent to our friend's house." "What did you think?" I asked, curious and a little apprehensive about how they had processed the story of their own family told from my perspective. "We think you were right," Emily said simply. "Mom and Dad treated you badly. They made us think you had left us, that you didn't want to be with us anymore. But we always knew that wasn't true because you loved us. We could feel it. We could feel it here," Claire added, placing her hand over her heart in the gesture I had taught her years before. They stayed for 3 hours that afternoon, telling me about school and friends and the changes in their lives since I'd been gone. Mrs. Apri Anderson had lasted only 4 months before quitting in frustration. They'd had 3 different nannies since then, none of whom they liked or trusted. "It's not the same," Emily explained. "They're all just doing a job. They don't actually care about us the way you did." "We told them about you," Claire added, "about how you used to sing to us and make up stories and remember our favorite everything. But they just looked confused, like they didn't understand why a nanny would do those things. Because those other nannies understood the boundaries that I had foolishly ignored. They understood that caring for someone else's children was work, not love. They understood that professional distance was safer than emotional investment, but I couldn't regret the love I had given these girls, even knowing how much pain it had caused me. Looking at them now, intelligent, confident, aware of their own worth, I could see the effects of being loved unconditionally for the first 6 and 3 years of their lives. That love had shaped them in ways that would last forever, regardless of whether their parents acknowledged my role in their development. "Do your parents know you're here?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "They think we're at the mall," Emily admitted. "We'll have to go home soon, but we wanted to see you. We wanted you to know that we remember everything. All the songs you sang, all the stories you told us, all the times you took care of us when we were sick or scared or sad. We wanted you to know that you were the best mommy we ever had, even if you weren't our real mommy," Claire added, with the directness that only children possess. "You were real," Emily corrected her sister. "She was real to us. Biology doesn't make a family. Love does. You taught us that, Maggie." I had taught them that through my actions, if not my words. I had shown them what unconditional love looked like, what it meant to put someone else's needs before your own, what it meant to be family by choice rather than by accident of birth. "I want you both to know something," I said, taking their hands in mine. "Everything I did for you, all the love I gave it freely. Not because it was my job, not because your parents paid me, but because I loved you, because you were my heart daughters, even if I could never say that out loud." "Can you say it now?" Emily asked. "Can you call us your heart daughters now?" "You are my heart daughters," I said, my voice breaking with emotion. "You will always be my heart daughters, and I will always be your heart mother, no matter what anyone else says, no matter how much time passes, no matter what happens in our lives." We held each other and cried then, for the years we had lost, for the pain we had endured, for the love that had survived despite everything that had tried to destroy it. Before they left, Emily pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. "This is our phone number and our email addresses," she said. "We want to stay in touch. We want you to be part of our lives again, even if it has to be secret." "It won't always have to be secret," Claire added with the confidence of childhood. "When we're 18, we can make our own decisions about who we love and who we see, and we'll never have to hide our family again." Our family. After all these years, after all the pain and separation and forced silence, they still considered me family. They still claimed me as their own, just as I had always claimed them in my heart. I watched them walk away that afternoon, two young girls who had risked their parents' anger to find the woman who had loved them first and best. They were brave and smart and loyal, qualities I like to think I had helped nurture during the years when I was their constant companion. As promised, we stayed in touch. Secret emails and occasional text messages, careful communications that wouldn't alert their parents to our renewed relationship. I sent them books and small gifts for their birthdays, packages mailed to their friends' houses so their parents wouldn't see them. Emily told me about her struggles with algebra and her excitement about joining the school newspaper. Claire shared her love of painting and her dreams of becoming an art teacher someday. They asked my advice about friend drama and school stress, included me in their daily lives in ways their parents had never allowed when I lived with them. And slowly, I healed from the trauma of our forced separation. Not completely. I don't think I will ever completely recover from the pain of being falsely accused or the agony of being separated from children I loved, but enough to build a full life, enough to find joy in other relationships, enough to use my experience to help other women in similar situations. 3 years after that first secret visit, Emily started her senior year of high school. She was accepted to Northwestern University with a partial scholarship and plans to study journalism. Inspired in part by the articles and book I had written about domestic workers' rights, "I want to tell stories about invisible people," she told me during one of our clandestine coffee meetings at a cafe far from her neighborhood. "Like you did. I want to make sure people like you get recognized for the important work you do." She had grown into a poised, articulate young woman with strong opinions about social justice and workers' rights. Her childhood experience of loving someone her parents refused to acknowledge had made her sensitive to issues of class and power, had taught her to see the humanity in people others overlooked. Claire, now 15, was developing into an artist with real talent. She painted portraits of families that included nannies and housekeepers and gardeners, challenging traditional definitions of who belongs in family pictures. Her art teacher at school was encouraging her to apply to art programs, and she dreamed of using her talent to advocate for social change. Both girls had been shaped by their early experience of unconditional love, but also by the painful lesson of watching that love be dismissed and devalued by the adults around them. They understood injustice in a way most privileged children never do, because they had witnessed it firsthand. "We're going to be better parents than ours were," Emily told me one afternoon as we walked through Lincoln Park, retracing steps we had taken together when she was small. "When we have children, we're going to make sure they know that every person who loves them is important. We're not going to let anyone be invisible in our families. We're going to invite you to our weddings," Claire added with determination, "and you're going to sit in the front row because you're our family too." These children I had loved from their earliest years were planning to honor me in their adult lives, to claim me publicly as someone who mattered to them. The recognition their parents had never been willing to give would come from Emily and Claire themselves when they were old enough to make their own choices about love and loyalty. On Emily's 18th birthday, she called me openly for the first time in years. She was legally an adult now, free to make her own decisions about relationships, no longer subject to her parents' control over who she could love. "I don't have to hide anymore," she said, her voice full of joy and relief. I can say out loud that you're my family. I can tell people about my heart mother who taught me what love looks like. That summer, she visited me regularly, sometimes bringing Claire when her younger sister could manage it without their parents' knowledge. We talked about everything we had missed during our years of forced separation, boys and friendships and dreams and fears, and the 1,000 small moments that make up a life. And finally, inevitably, we talked about forgiveness. "Are you ever going to forgive Mom and Dad?" Emily asked me one afternoon as we sat in my small garden, watching the flowers I had planted bloom in the Chicago sunshine. It was a question I had asked myself many times over the years. Was I obligated to forgive people who had never asked for forgiveness? Could I find peace without pardoning the injuries they had caused? What did I owe to people who had shaped my life so profoundly but had never acknowledged my humanity? "I've forgiven them for being who they are," I said finally, "for being people so focused on control and appearances that they couldn't see the love right in front of them, for being so afraid of losing authority over their children that they were willing to sacrifice their children's happiness to maintain that authority." "But," Emily prompted, sensing there was more, "but I don't forgive them for the choice to keep hurting you girls after they knew they were wrong. When your mother found that bracelet in your father's car, when they realized I had been innocent all along, they had a choice. They could have called me, apologized, tried to repair the damage they had done to all of us. Instead, they chose silence. They chose to let you and Claire go on, thinking I had abandoned you rather than admit they had made a mistake." Emily nodded slowly. At 18, she was old enough to understand the complexity of adult motivations, old enough to see her parents clearly rather than through the forgiving lens of childhood. That choice, to protect their own pride at the expense of their children's emotional well-being, that's not something I can forgive, I continued, because it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about you and Claire and the damage being done to your hearts while they maintained their comfortable fiction that I was the problem. "They lost so much," Emily said quietly. "They lost you, but they also lost the chance to see us grow up with someone who loved us unconditionally. They lost the opportunity to learn from you about what real love looks like. They lost the chance to be better people." She was right. The Sheldons had lost more than they knew when they fired me over a false accusation. They had lost not just a competent employee, but a woman who had genuinely cared about their family's well-being, who had loved their children enough to sacrifice her own dreams, who had tried to make their household a haven of warmth and security. But most importantly, they had lost the opportunity to model integrity and justice for their daughters. Emily and Claire had learned important lessons from watching their parents' behavior during our crisis, lessons about power and class and the treatment of vulnerable people. But those weren't the lessons the Sheldons had intended to teach. On Emily's graduation day from high school, I sat in the audience with other families and watched her walk across the stage to receive her diploma. She had not invited her parents to exclude me, but she had made sure I knew about the ceremony, had saved me a seat, had introduced me to her friends as my family. After the ceremony, as we posed for pictures together, a photographer from the local newspaper approached us. He had recognized me from my advocacy work and wanted to do a story about our reunion, about the lasting bonds that can form between caregivers and the children they love. "This is the woman who helped raise me," Emily told the reporter proudly, her arm around my shoulders. "She taught me what love looks like, what justice means, what it costs to care about people who can't always care for you back. Everything good about who I am started with her." The resulting article, published on the front page of the Sunday Lifestyle section, was titled "Love Without Borders: A Former Nanny and Her Heart Daughters Reunite." It featured photos of Emily, Claire, and me together, along with quotes about the importance of recognizing and respecting the people who help raise our children. The article reached thousands of readers, including many who had similar stories of loving caregivers who had been dismissed or forgotten. but it also reached the Sheldons. 2 days after the article was published, Mrs. Misa, Sheldon called me for the first time in over 5 years. "I saw the newspaper article," she said without preamble when I answered the phone. "Hello, Victoria," I replied, using her first name just as I had with her husband, establishing that we were speaking as equals now rather than as employer and employee. "I don't appreciate my family's private business being discussed in the media," she continued, her voice tight with anger. "Emily and Claire are adults now," I said calmly. "They get to decide what stories to tell about their own lives. And this story, about a caregiver who loved them and was wrongly dismissed, this is their story as much as it is mine." "You're trying to embarrass us," she accused. "Trying to make us look bad because you're bitter about being fired." "I'm trying to tell the truth about what it means to love someone else's children," I corrected. "About the relationships that form between caregivers and families, about the humanity of domestic workers, about the costs of treating people as disposable when they're actually irreplaceable." "You were always too emotional," she said, echoing criticisms I had heard from her for years. "Too attached. We warned you about maintaining appropriate boundaries." "You warned me not to love your children too much," I replied. "But you never warned them not to love me back. And they did love me, Victoria. They still do. That love was real, whether you approved of it or not." "They're confused," she said quickly. "They romanticize their childhood. Remember you as more important than you actually were." "They remember being loved unconditionally," I said firmly. "They remember having someone in their lives who put their needs first, who celebrated their successes and comforted their failures, who was there for every milestone and every ordinary Tuesday. If that seems more important to them than it does to you, maybe you should ask yourself why." The conversation continued for another few minutes, with Victoria alternately trying to convince me that I had been a disruptive influence on her family and demanding that I stop encouraging Emily and Claire to maintain contact with me. But I could hear something new in her voice, uncertainty, maybe even regret. For the first time, she was being forced to confront the consequences of her choices. The article had made our story public, had forced her social circle to consider how she had treated someone who had loved her children. And Emily's public declaration that I was family, that I had been essential to her development, challenged the narrative Victoria had constructed about my role in their household. "What do you want from us?" she asked finally, her anger deflating into something that sounded almost like defeat. "I don't want anything from you," I said honestly. "I have Emily and Claire's love. I have recognition for my work. I have a life that fulfills me. I don't need your approval or your acknowledgement anymore." "Then why did you agree to the newspaper article? Why make this public?" "Because Emily asked me to," I said simply. "Because she wanted people to know that love comes in many forms, that family is about choice as much as biology, that the people who help raise children deserve recognition and respect." "She's young," Victoria said. "She doesn't understand the complexities." "She understands love," I replied. "She understands justice. She understands the difference between people who care about her and people who only care about controlling her. Those are pretty important things to understand." Victoria ended the call without saying goodbye, but I felt strangely peaceful after our conversation. For years I had imagined what I would say to her if given the chance, what arguments I would make, what emotions I would express. But when the opportunity finally came, I found that I didn't need to convince her of anything. I didn't need her apology or her acknowledgement. I didn't need her to validate my importance in Emily and Claire's lives. I had already been validated by the people whose opinions mattered most, the children I had loved, who had grown into young adults capable of articulating the value of that love. Emily started college that fall, and Claire began her junior year of high school. Both of them would occasionally mention me in conversations with their parents, not defiantly or angrily, but matter-of-factly, as someone who was simply part of their lives. They had stopped asking permission to love me, stopped hiding their connection to me, stopped pretending that 6 years of shared life could be erased by their parents' disapproval. And gradually, slowly, their parents began to accept this reality. Not enthusiastically, not with the acknowledgement I might have hoped for, but with the resigned recognition that their daughters were adults now, capable of making their own decisions about relationships and loyalty. On Claire's 18th birthday, 3 years later, she invited me to her birthday dinner at a nice restaurant downtown. For the first time since I'd been fired 7 years earlier, I was included in a Sheldon family celebration. It was awkward at first. Victoria was coldly polite, clearly uncomfortable with my presence, but unwilling to create a scene at her daughter's birthday dinner. Richard was subdued, speaking to me briefly but formally, as if I were a distant acquaintance, rather than someone who had lived in his home for 6 years. But Emily and Claire were radiant, clearly thrilled to have their family complete for the first time in years. They talked easily, including me in conversations, sharing memories that spanned the gap between past and present, making it clear that I belonged at that table. "Remember when Maggie taught us to make friendship bracelets?" Claire said at one point, showing off a bracelet she had woven that morning. "I still use the patterns she showed me." "Remember the lullabies she used to sing?" Emily added. "I'm going to sing them to my children someday." Their parents listened to these memories with visible discomfort, perhaps realizing for the first time how central I had been to their daughter's childhood experiences. How many important moments had involved the woman they had dismissed as easily replaceable help. After dinner, as we stood outside the restaurant saying goodbye, Claire hugged me tightly. "Thank you for never giving up on us," she whispered in my ear. "Thank you for loving us even when it was hard, even when it hurt, even when they tried to make you forget us." "Thank you for remembering me," I whispered back. "Thank you for growing up into such amazing young women. Thank you for letting me be part of your story." As I walked home that night through the familiar streets of Chicago where I had built and lost and rebuilt my life, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to that moment. 7 years earlier, I had been fired in disgrace, accused of theft, separated from children I loved, forced to start over with nothing but my integrity and my memories. But I had survived. More than survived. I had thrived. I had found my voice, told my story, built a career advocating for people like me. I had learned to value myself, to demand respect, to create relationships based on mutual recognition rather than service and gratitude. Most importantly, I had learned that love, real love, survives everything. It survives accusation and separation and silence and time. It survives the attempts of fearful adults to control and contain it. It survives class differences and power imbalances and all the careful boundaries that society tries to impose on human connection. Emily and Claire had loved me through 6 years of daily care and 7 years of forced separation. They had remembered me when it would have been easier to forget, had chosen me when they could have chosen silence, had claimed me as family when their parents refused to acknowledge my humanity. That love had sustained me through the darkest period of my life. It had given me the strength to rebuild, the courage to speak truth, the wisdom to know my own worth. And now, as I watch these young women become the kind of adults who recognize and honor the people who have loved them, I knew that everything I had sacrificed, all the pain I had endured, all the battles I had fought, it had all been worth it. Not because I got my job back or received the apology I deserved, but because love had won. Because 2 little girls who had been my heart daughters had grown into young women who understood that family is created by choice, that love doesn't require permission, that the most important relationships in our lives are often the ones society refuses to recognize. Today, Emily is a successful journalist specializing in stories about social justice and workers' rights. She credits her childhood experience with me as the foundation for her understanding of class and power dynamics in American society. She has written extensively about domestic workers' rights and the invisible labor that keeps wealthy families functioning. Claire is an art teacher at an inner-city elementary school, using her talent and passion to nurture creativity in children who might not otherwise have access to art education. She volunteers with a nonprofit that provides support services for domestic workers, and her apartment is filled with paintings that feature caregivers and the children they love. Both of them are married now, to partners who understand and respect their relationship with me. I was invited to both weddings, seated in the front row as family, introduced to their friends and colleagues as the woman who helped raise them. Their wedding photos include me, finally and officially, as part of their family portrait. And when Emily gave birth to her first child last year, I was among the first people she called from the hospital. "Maggie," she said, her voice tired but joyful, "I want you to meet your granddaughter." Granddaughter. The word hit me like a gift I had never dared to hope for. This child, born to the little girl I had loved as my own, would know me not as hired help, but as family. She would grow up understanding that love creates relationships that transcend biology, that the people who care for us matter regardless of their official titles. When I held that baby for the first time, looking down at her perfect tiny face while Emily watched with tired, happy eyes, I thought about the long journey that had brought us to this moment, the accusations and heartbreak, the separation and silence, the slow rebuilding of trust and connection. All of it had led to this, a new generation being born into a family that had learned, through hard experience, to value love over convention, heart over hierarchy. That baby is now 6 months old, and I see her regularly. Emily and her husband have asked me to be her godmother, a role that recognizes officially what I have always been in practice, someone who loves this family unconditionally, someone who will always be there for them, someone whose commitment transcends employment or convenience. Sometimes, when I'm holding that baby and watching Emily watch me, I think about the parents who fired me 7 years ago. They have a granddaughter now, too, but their relationship with her is complicated by their estranged relationship with Emily, who has never completely forgiven them for their treatment of me, not because I asked her to hold a grudge, but because their behavior during that crisis taught her something about their character that she has never been able to forget. She learned that her parents were capable of treating someone who loved their family as disposable, that they valued their own pride more than their children's emotional well-being, that they would rather maintain a comfortable lie than admit a painful truth. Those are hard lessons for a child to learn about her parents, but they are also valuable lessons about the kind of adult she wanted to become, the kind of parent she wanted to be, the kind of person she wanted to be in the world. So perhaps some good came from all of that pain after all. Perhaps justice sometimes works in ways we don't expect. Through time and growth and the choices that children make when they become adults. I still live in Chicago, in a larger apartment now in a neighborhood I love. My second book was published to wide acclaim, and I'm working on a third. I speak regularly at conferences and universities about domestic workers' rights, about the complexities of loving other people's children, about what it means to create family through choice rather than biology. I have a full life now, friends and colleagues and meaningful work, and the deep satisfaction that comes from using your experience to help others. I date occasionally, though I've never married. For a long time, I thought that was because I had given all my love to Emily and Claire, that there wasn't room in my heart for anyone else. But I think now that it was because I needed to learn to love myself first. I needed to understand my own worth, to demand proper treatment, to create relationships based on mutual respect rather than service and gratitude. Once I learned those lessons, learned them through pain and loss and the long journey back to myself, I became capable of healthier relationships with everyone in my life, including, surprisingly, with Richard and Victoria Sheldon. We will never be friends. We will never have the warm, affectionate relationship that I might have once imagined with my employers. Too much has happened. Too much damage has been done. Too much truth has been revealed about who we all are under pressure. But we have achieved something that might be more valuable than friendship. We have achieved respect. They have finally acknowledged my importance in Emily and Claire's lives. They include me in family celebrations. They treat me as someone with standing in their daughter's stories, someone whose opinions matter, someone who belongs. It took 7 years and the intervention of their grown children to get that recognition, but it came eventually. And perhaps that's its own kind of justice. Belated but real, grudging but genuine. When people ask me now what I learned from those years of loving other people's children, of being dismissed and separated and eventually reclaimed, I tell them this: love always wins, but not always in the ways we expect or the time frames we hope for. I didn't get the immediate apology I wanted or the swift restoration I dreamed of. I had to rebuild my life from nothing, had to learn to value myself when no one else would, had to find the courage to demand better treatment. But in the end, the children I loved remembered me. They grew up into adults capable of honoring the people who had helped shape them. They created space for me in their adult lives, space for my love, space for the relationship that had been denied for so long. And now there's a new generation, Emily's daughter and someday Claire's children too, who will grow up knowing that love comes in many forms, that family is about choice as much as biology, that the people who care for us deserve recognition and respect regardless of their official titles. That's the real victory. Not just being remembered or reclaimed, but helping to create a world where other caregivers won't have to fight so hard for recognition, where other women won't have to choose between loving children and protecting their own hearts, where other families will understand from the beginning that everyone who loves their children is part of their story. Have you ever cared for someone who later forgot you? Have you ever loved someone else's child as your own, only to be reminded that blood is thicker than affection? Have you ever given your heart to a family that treated you as disposable, replaceable, invisible? If you have, I want you to know this: your love mattered. Your sacrifices were real. Your heartbreak was valid. You were not foolish to love without guarantee, not wrong to hope for recognition, not weak to be hurt by dismissal. You were human. You were loving. You were brave. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, the children we love grow up into adults who understand what we gave them. Sometimes they come looking for us. Sometimes they choose us again as adults, with full knowledge of what that choice means. Sometimes love really does win. Tell me your story in the comments below. Have you lived something similar, or do you know someone who has walked this path of loving beyond boundaries, caring beyond recognition, giving beyond reward? If this story has touched your heart, please like and subscribe. It helps reach another woman who cares for children with love and dedication, another person who needs to know that their invisible sacrifices are seen and valued by someone, somewhere. To continue this emotional journey with us, we've prepared a special podcast filled with stories just as moving as this one. You can find it by clicking on the link to the left. Each episode explores the complex relationships between caregivers and families, the triumph of love over circumstance, the courage it takes to claim your worth in a world that often overlooks your contributions. Thank you for joining me on this journey of the heart, for witnessing my story, for understanding that love comes in many forms and family is created in countless ways. Your attention, your empathy, your recognition, these gifts you've given me by listening mean more than you know. I'll see you in the next story, where we'll explore another corner of the human heart, another tale of love and loss, and the infinite ways we find each other in this complicated world. Until then, remember, you matter. Your love matters. Your story matters. And somewhere, someone is better for having known you.